Technology and social media have transformed our habits, desires, and attitude to money. There is now a growing divide between the majority of people getting poorer and poorer and the minority getting richer and richer. Unlike common belief, the difference is not how much they make, but the level of financial education, and most importantly, their money mindset. My name is Sam Abrika, CEO of Nova Money and ex-investment banker. Throughout my life, I've moved from the poorest 1% to the richest 1%. I can tell you, it makes a hell of a difference. In this podcast, I will interview everyday people, psychologists, investors, influencers, entrepreneurs, hustlers, and self-made millionaires, so you can learn from their experience, their habits, their mindset, and accelerate your journey to financial freedom. For our first episode, I have invited Denis Harhalakis, an ex-trader and investment manager, one who is very familiar with the mathematics and behavioral aspects of finance. Denis left the adrenaline of the trading floors to start his own company, Cambridge Money Coach, so he could focus on his true passion, educating people on their own psychology to transform the way they think about money. Hello, Denis.
Hi, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm very good. How about you?
I'm very well. Very well, thank you very much. This is very exciting.
Denis, I'm so happy to have you today in the show. We were introduced by an ex-colleague of mine who was attending a masterclass as part of his CFA program, and his masterclass was about the emotional aspect in finance. And guess who was the host? It was you, Denis. And that's how I was introduced to this new concept of money coaching that was completely new to me. Then I checked your website and I have to say, I was very impressed by the quality of all your articles and all your analysis on the behavioral and psychological aspect of finance.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. I suppose, I'm like 3 or 4 years into money coaching now, and it seems very obvious, but maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't very clear to me the role that emotion plays. And it just, so many people struggle with this because they look at it and they go, why is it not just the numbers? Why do I get tripped up by the emotional side? And so as a money coach, that's what I help people understand. For me, money coaching is a framework for understanding how you think, feel, and I guess behave around money, so that you can make better decisions, reduce anxiety and other negative emotions, and communicate in healthy ways. And the root of this, I guess, is understanding how our brains work around money, how it get wired around money, how the whole thing works. Because we certainly didn't evolve to be handling money or long-term financial planning, and yet we try and use our brains for this. I was trying to think of a suitable analogy because I'm doing a talk tomorrow about, if your brain is like a ride-on lawnmower and you're trying to make it do Le Mans or F1 or as a snowplow, it's not going to work so well, is it?
What you said is very true. Finance is both about the numbers and the psychological aspect. As a founder of Nova Money, we are building the tech to help people with all the numbers and the planning and understanding them. And actually, it's far from being trivial, and a lot of people also struggle with the numbers. But I 100% agree that the psychological aspect is so overlooked, and we tend to forget that managing money is also about managing your emotions, controlling your behaviors, your habits, and how you will react to your environment. So why do you think that the psychological aspect is so overlooked?
I think because the discussions around financial literacy tend to be very much discussions around numeracy. What is it about 100% APR that you don't understand? And we use that kind of logic to analyze, why people behave this way or why they don't behave that way. And if you think about it, what is this whole concept of Homo economicus? This ridiculous guy that was invented in the 1950s by the Chicago School of Economics, because, if I can create a formula and then I can model things. So if you look at the history of economics, before the 1950s, it was really all about behavior and it had nothing to do with formulas. But this whole concept that you could analyze behavior and create formulas based on a whole bunch of ridiculous assumptions is how a lot of this whole approach to financial literacy or managing your money as a numerical exercise starts. And if you think about where we've moved from like 1950s Milton Friedman and all those guys, it took Kahneman and Tversky to point out that people don't make rational decisions, and they don't make rational decisions around money all the time. In fact, most of the time they don't. So in some ways, we've kind of come full circle back to going, okay, so we're not rational human beings. Great. How does that help us? So the missing link that I see, because I spent a lot of time poking around the behavioral finance space, is that it says, okay, we as human beings have these suboptimal heuristics, these biases, these cognitive biases, these cognitive shortcuts. And so that makes us bad at investing and bad at long-term planning. What's missing from this, though, is the concept of what role our emotions play in our lives. So trying to pretend that people's decision-making process is devoid of emotions is clearly ridiculous. That's, in fact, all decision-making is based on emotions and prediction from the brain as to what's likely to happen next. So the emotional piece is key to it. And so if you look at your behavior or around anything, but let's pick money, then you need to understand what the emotional component makes up. So it's the same argument as saying, well, dieting or healthy eating is just about numbers, calories in, calories out. Well, we all know that's not correct, at least not from an individual perspective. So we still have this whole kind of dialogue around financial literacy that is very much based in the numerical. It's a numeracy issue. Obviously, you must be bad at maths if you can't manage your finances.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There is a persistent cliche or a stigma which says that if you're not good at managing your money, then it means you must not be good with numbers. What's wrong with you? And I know it's not the case because we have a lot of users. They're perfectly fine with the numbers. They're engineers, physicians, etc. It doesn't mean that managing their money and saving and adopting the right habits is something easy because it's beyond the numbers. I'd like to make a parallel about what you just said. The quantification of finance started indeed in the 50s, and it worked very well for the banks and the professional financial industry. And what's interesting is, in a professional industry, everything is about the numbers. For every single problem, there's an equation for that. There will be one engineer developing a model looking at the data and finding a numerical question for every single decision making. And when you look at the composition of a trading floor, you see that it's just full of engineers everywhere.
Usually French.
Yes, that's very true. There are so much French people as analysts, quant, and all these technical jobs that London is said to be the third biggest French city.
Yeah.
Obviously, the quantification of finance is working for banks. Otherwise, they would not hire all these French people. But why do you think it's not the case in the personal finance space?
Well, I'd like to also tease out a little bit more about what you just said, because what we're talking about is not necessarily behavior. So the quantifications is based on the quantification of price movements of asset prices. And as the boys at GameStop just showed us, that doesn't always end happily. And if you remember back to the original pricing of volatility before people learned how to price the option smile correctly, that went badly wrong too. So our process of understanding and quantifying economic phenomena, let's say, or the behavior of markets, or the behavior of prices, the behavior of people within markets, is always being updated. So I wouldn't say that we've kind of reached a total nirvana around that at all. But to kind of get back to your original point, I guess what's coming up for me is this. It's almost the same question as saying, why is it that IFAs can be really bad with their own money and really good with clients' money? Why is it that people can go and work in banks and be really fantastic quants and really bad with their own finances? So I think the key to understanding this is the concept of psychological distance. Psychological distance means there's a space between me and what I'm doing. So if I'm working in a bank, even if I'm trading, although that's kind of right on the edge of the interplay between my own emotions around money and my trading, but fundamentally psychological safety means that I can model the behavior of options or the behavior of asset prices or wherever, because it doesn't directly impact how I feel about myself. Whereas when I'm talking about my personal finances, as they say, the thing about personal finances is it's not about finances, it's all about personal.
Good point. I speak to a lot of users about their finances and what they find complicated. A lot of people are kind of intimidated by all this jargon made very complex by the industry, and they kind of have this conception that only bankers can understand everything about finance, and actually they do, and they're the master of it, and so they must be so good at managing their money, and they must be so good at making the right decision. The fun part is I could see the other side of the equation. I could see the people working in the banking industry, and I had colleagues. They had very comfortable job, they had high income, and they had credit card debt. Believe it or not, they were complaining about the cost of life. Oh, the milk is too expensive, life is too expensive. I can't make it. And they were convinced that the problem was about the cost of life and not themselves.
Yeah. I can't survive. I don't know how I'm going to continue. So I worked with a guy who was regional head of lending and governance who went bankrupt. So in terms of how he couldn't manage his personal finances. So you're absolutely right. There are lots of examples of this. There are doctors who smoke. Why would you do that if you're in the health industry? Why would you be bad with your own money if you're in finance? How many people in debt advisory don't have debt? No, large numbers of them do. So what I'm saying about psychological distance is this concept that it's far easier to give the right advice to someone else than it is to follow it yourself. So that doesn't help with some of the broader issues around financial literacy and how we feel about ourselves, but it explains partially why you can have a very healthy relationship with one aspect of money in terms of kind of being good with money, being a good accountant, being a good fund manager, being a good IFA, being even a good trader or a good modeler or whatever, but you can't run your own finances.
Nobody taught us that running our own finances is not an easy process because of all the emotions, all the feelings attached to it. The problem that I see is a lot of people have this feeling of guilt. They feel guilty of not being able to run their own finances on their own. And this feeling of guilt is preventing them from overcoming the problem because they just feel bad about it.
Well, most people that come to me have never been shown how to manage their finances. So you can say, well, of course, that's why they're coming to a money coach. That makes perfect sense. The reality is that it extends far, far beyond the people that come to me for money coaching. Most people have never been shown how to manage their finances. And the problem with that is that you really need to know how to handle money in today's world. So most people don't know how to use a chainsaw. Most people don't know how to fly a hot air balloon. That doesn't really impact you on a day-to-day basis, but not getting on top of your finances does. And so when you add that to this kind of slightly preachy, puritanical tone around, well, what's wrong with you? It's only numbers, right? You then have to ask yourself, well, why can't I do this? So if I look at my clients, they all started in the same place, which is, okay, how do I manage my finances? And then later on, they moved to, why is it so hard? Why can't I manage their finances? And then they moved to, what's wrong with me? And that's a very, very dark place to find yourself, because if you think there's something wrong with you, it's very difficult to move out of that shame and guilt space to go and think that actually there's nothing wrong with me. It's just that nobody showed me. So the first thing I go through with most of my clients is, no one showed you how to do this. You can't do it. It's not your fault. But if you think there's something wrong with you, so when you were growing up, Sam, do you remember messages from people like, why don't you understand this? What's wrong with you? This is simple. What's wrong with you? Why don't you get this? What's the matter with you? What's wrong with you? Come on, you can do this. Do you remember those messages?
I think it's a common rhetoric that we all have heard from our teacher at school, our friends, or even our parents.
Parents. Sure. So I'm not being judgmental around this. This isn't about kind of trying to complain about my childhood. This is just simply pointing out that a lot of the messages that we heard growing up made us think that if there was something that we couldn't do and everyone else seemed to be able to do, or it was supposed to be simple, or it was supposed to be straightforward, then the reason we couldn't do it is because there's something wrong with us. And so my first message to everybody always is, if no one showed you how to manage your finances and you struggle with it, because it's not easy, there's nothing wrong with you at all. Let's start there and move forward from that point. And that's critically important.
They look at the external image projected by social media, where people showcase their big car, their big house, the fancy holiday.
Right.
And then we believe that it's normality and say to ourselves, what's wrong with me?
Sure.
Why can't I enjoy the same lifestyle?
Sure. What's wrong with me? Yeah, why can't I have that? What's wrong with me? And of course, you don't know anything about other people's finances. We don't talk about this stuff. The only thing you know about someone with a new car is they now have substantially less money than they did before. They have swapped that for a car. So part of our culture is that it likes to tell us that we have agency and control, because that's kind of wrapped up in moral codes. And a lot of, financial literacy is kind of very moralistic. Why don't you understand this? What's wrong with you? And the problem with that is that it leads us to have guilt and shame about things that we think and do that are not the result of conscious cognitive processes. Most of our behavior is not the result of thought out I don't like the word rational, thought out conscious decisions. And yet, we need to have that as a structure for society. Otherwise, we can't blame people for things. We can't lock people up for things. We can't punish people for things. And this kind of concept of, well, you're responsible for your actions extends to finances. You must have made some bad decisions because otherwise you wouldn't have debt. Otherwise, your finances wouldn't be in a mess. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the state that you're in. So it must be your fault. And it isn't. It isn't your fault. I think, take a 15-year-old child and ask yourself how much of where that child is, what that child thinks, what that child does is a result of decisions made by that child. I'd say not very much, right? The DNA lottery tells you where you're born, what color you are, where your parents live. And it's massively, massively important. And then it'll dictate what values were you brought up with, what school you went to, what your learning process was like, how you think about yourself, how you think about other people. All those things are massively important in life. And yet none of them, if you're a 15-year-old, you have really had any choice in. So now move forward 10 years and say, okay, well, actually all of those formative impressions, all those beliefs, all of those things have dictated what you've done for the next 10 years. How much agency and choice have you really had in your life? And how much responsibility do you really bear for some of those decisions? And this is before we talk about the way the brain makes decisions anyway. So that's why you start, you've heard me talk about starting with self-compassion. If you don't start with self-compassion, it's really, really hard to move forward.
On one hand, we are the result of our environment, and we all like to think that we are completely free and what we do, all our actions originate from us, but the fact is a lot of it comes from our environment. So it's not necessarily our fault if we don't know things.
Yeah.
And I agree that self-compassion here is very important. On the other hand, people are responsible of their actions. There is this concept of responsibility of everything that we do. So how do you find the balance between self-compassion and responsibility?
Yes, so I'm not here to absolve people of the mistakes they've made in their past. What I'm saying is, and the nuance here is that we didn't make most of the choices that make us who we are. But we can make choices about who we want to be.
We can choose who we want to be.
Yeah.
Choosing who we want to be is not an easy task. Unfortunately, nobody taught us how to do that. And the reason I think it's not easy is the default behavior is just to be the victim of all the social pressure, all the advertising targeted at us.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that advertising is something bad or evil. I'm saying that the problem is the only message that we receive and we absorb is based on advertising. Why? Because companies are the only one paying to get our eyeballs' attention. And this creates a world where we build a narrative that our sole purpose is to buy what others are presenting us to buy.
Sure.
Advertising is everywhere. There's not a single day where I can open my email without seeing advertising, when I can go on social media and really think who I want to talk to. No, it's there at every single step of our life.
Sure.
And when I keep seeing advertising or photos of a guy with a nice shining Rolex, I know that I don't need a Rolex in my life, but it kind of occupies my working memory. And my working memory is then telling me this implicit message that I need to become that guy. On a rational level, I know that I don't need that Rolex, but this is what my working memory is going to tell me because I keep seeing the same thing over and over. The long-term effect is that it becomes easy to forget who I want to become.
And it's targeted at you individually based on your browsing history and your likes and all of that stuff. So you're absolutely correct to point this out. It's not just that people are being told, if you buy this, drive this, wear this, you'll be happy, successful, rich, beautiful. It's that if you don't, you are not enough in yourself. And that's a very, very undermining message. And it makes it really easy for people to essentially be hijacked by advertising into buying things they don't need with money they don't have to impress people that aren't interested. And we're also ruining the planet at the same time. I find that really interesting, your point around agency and how much control we have over our environment and how much control we have over our decision-making process, because I think you have to start with forgiveness and self-compassion, because it's really hard to believe you can make good choices if you blame yourself for everything that you've done so far in life without understanding what it was that got you there in the first place. And so what you end up doing is you set yourself up for failure, because you go, well, I'm going to be a different person tomorrow. And that's quite hard to do. So it's not a straight line process. Any activity that you want to do or get better at is not a straight line process. Spend a lot of time running. You go up, you go down, you go up. The general trajectory is towards progress, but you always have to give yourself time to rest and recover. And there are days when you feel like it and days you don't feel like it. Now, if you're judging yourself on that, if you start with the basis that there's something wrong with me and you can't achieve that goal that you've set yourself, then you're going to come back and go, oh, yeah, I knew I couldn't do that. There must be something wrong with me. As opposed to going, actually, there's nothing wrong with me. This is really hard. I need a coach, for example. I need help. I need support. I need a safe space when I can talk about my fears and how if we're talking about money, how difficult this is for me. And the whole way of building positive financial behaviors, building good habits, improving things, willpower is massively overrated. It's a really, really bad way to try and change things. You need to change your environment so that it supports the decisions you want to make. And part of that is changing your internal environment, not just your external environment.
My environment is not really helping me. And I don't know if it's good, but I have to rely a lot on my willpower. Whenever I open my social media, whenever I go and browse on a website, I'm always teased and nugged. Temptation. Google knows all my history. Social media has all our data. So I don't know how the environment can help me and how to change that. What I have done is I need to increase my will. Whenever the big tech companies are becoming better at using our data to target us, then I just need to increase even by a higher degree my willpower. So I don't know about my internal environment, but what can I do about my external environment?
Well, I'm going to throw this one back at you because you're the tech man. So I deal with the internal environment. There's an expression that we spend a lot of time trying to use financial strategies to fill emotional gaps in our lives. That's what spending is in some senses. So we develop this financial response, as in using money to deal with the discomfort in our lives. And that's just not ever sustainable. So the way I look at money is that you have to understand there's three parts to it. There's what you think about money, there's what you think about yourself, and there's what you think about money and yourself. That's the three parts of our relationship with money. And you can't just strip one out. You can't just focus on financial literacy and go, well, that's what I think about money, even though that, again, has emotions tied up in it, and forget about how I think about myself and how I think about myself and money. So what does that mean? It means if I feel good about myself, I'm competent, I have confidence in my knowledge and decision-making process, I take ownership of my outcomes. I feel good about money. Money is a tool to achieve well-being. It's not the work of the devil, the root of all evil, or something we don't talk about. I feel good about myself and money, or money and myself. Money doesn't make me feel anxious, regretful, ashamed, or guilty. I'm comfortable engaging with the financial system. I am the kind of person who manages their finances well. So you can see, when you put it all together, our relationship with money is also about how I feel about myself, as much as it is as how I interact with money and how I feel about money. And so this process of getting comfortable with money is partly about who you are and what you've learned. And we come back to, if you've never been shown how to manage money, it's very difficult to have a healthy relationship with it. It's like if I said to you, Sam, here's my car. Have you never driven before? Drive it to France for me. You're going to get in it and you might be able to work the pedals, but you're going to crash. And then you'll come out and then you won't learn, right? There's a feedback mechanism involved, but the feedback mechanism is probably going to reinforce the fact that it's really difficult. Why is it so hard and what's wrong with me?
I'm a terrible driver. Believe me, you don't want to see me on the road.
But you went through some formal learning process that says that you, Sam, are not allowed to go on the road until you've passed these theoretical and practical tests. Do we do that with money? No, we don't. Right? And yet, think about the feedback mechanism of being bad with money is really quite scary. I mean, there's debt, which is scary in itself. And then there's the fact that you feel incapable of making sensible financial decisions. What does that say about you? How do you feel about that? So that's pretty scary too. It's not just that I'm in debt. It's just that I'm incapable of managing this. What's wrong with me? Even if society doesn't say it, you're going to say it to yourself. That's why the emotional piece is why it's so much more than just the numbers.
All experienced marketers know that the best way to sell is not to show on a rational level the product, the service, the features, and how it will be useful for people. So it's not on the utility level.
Sure.
What they do is they try to attach emotional attachment to what they want to sell. And why? Because we always have emotional needs, emotional voids that we need to fill.
Yeah.
And their whole game is try to make us believe that buying their stuff will fill our emotional needs. How can we become more aware about our own emotional state? And have you identified a pattern where we would be more susceptible of buying things that we don't need just because we're trying to fill that emotional void?
Oh, yeah. There's a great little mnemonic for people that are recovering from addictions. It's called HALT, H-A-L-T. So you, me, and everybody, we make really bad decisions when we're hungry, angry or anxious, lonely or tired. So if you look at people who are kind of, on Amazon at 3:00 in the morning, that's not great, right? You're anxious, you're angry, you're lonely, you're tired. If you're hungry or tired, there isn't enough energy in the system to run conscious cognitive processing. Conscious cognitive processing, as in, thoughtful concentrating, uses 15 to 20 times the amount of energy that the subconscious uses. And so part of the reasons brains evolved is because when organisms became more complex, the brain evolved to handle the metabolic systems. And so energy budget, how much energy you have, and how the brain allocates energy to the various processes of running the body, doing exercise and managing those metabolic processes is actually quite important. So when you're tired, you can't concentrate because the brain says, I've not got very much energy. I'm not going to waste it on concentrating. That process is unknown to us because we're not in touch with our internal responses system. Because if you imagine you could understand what the brain was doing inside the body, it would be like this white noise that would overwhelm you. So we're not aware of that, right? If you hit yourself, you've got external pain. But what's going on internally, you don't know about. So hungry and tired, not enough energy to run the brain or the social part of the brain, the conscious cognitive processes of the brain. You know you're just too tired, and you're even too tired to argue. Anxious, angry, or lonely are states in which cortisol is released. It's very close to fight or flight. And when cortisol is released, it causes this thing called cognitive narrowing. It reduces our capacity to think straight. And the origins of this are, if you think about running away with great haste from danger, how much of your bodily resources, how much of your body budget should you devote to running away with great haste from danger when you've got something with more teeth than legs that's chasing you? All of it? Some of it? Most of it? All of it, right? All of it, right? 120%. My God, this is life or death. And that's what it's all about, life or death. So what that means is the brain says, fine, you're running with great haste from danger. 100% of everything that we have is devoted into that. So we're going to shut down everything else. Your auditory vision narrows, your hearing narrows. You don't need, when you're running with great haste from danger, to be looking around going, oh, yeah, that's great. That's a coconut. I'll come back for that later. Or I love what, Uncle Phil has done with his hair. None of that. You need to get out of there because it's life or death. Now, that works really well as an evolutionary strategy when you are living in the savannah and then it's an uncertain world. There are lots of things that could kill you. It's not a great way to be managing your finances. So we're not designed for managing finances. Our brains aren't built for that. We can do it when we are in conscious cognitive mode. We don't do it very well when we're in default mode. Default mode is like low energy or fight or flight or freeze. And so the processes that the brain doesn't distinguish between emotional danger or physical danger, it just kicks in with this massive response when it predicts that you're in a dangerous situation. So if you spend a lot of time in pain around your finances, your brain thinks finance is pain. I'm going to do the danger signal alert here. And if it releases cortisol, that means it narrows your capacity to think. And guess what? That just perpetuates a situation. Every time you think about your finances, you feel awful. You don't have the cognitive capacity to deal with it rationally. Don't have the capacity to deal with long-term financial planning. You just need to get out of the pain and the discomfort that you're in right now. And if that involves spending a bit of money or ignoring your finances or just taking the letter and burning it, that's the rational thing to do. That's what your brain is telling you to do. It's not irrational to ignore your finances if thinking about your finances causes you pain.
My personal theory is that humans never behave irrationally. There's always a rationale for what they're doing, but we just might not know it because maybe it's hidden through our emotional state, etc.
Totally.
The problem that now I see is we have all the tech companies that have all our data. Why? Because as consumers, we don't want to pay for any product. We don't want to pay for Facebook, Gmail, etc. So they give everything to us for free, or at least we believe that they give that for free. They actually make money through our data by pushing all that advertising. And now we reach the point where they have gathered so much data that they start to understand us better than anybody else, better than we could ever understand ourselves. They can even understand our emotions and what we need better than us. It's really scary. When I go on YouTube knows better than me what I want to watch. And this is not a coincidence.
Yeah.
All these companies are hiring the smartest and the most expensive data scientists, psychologists, machine learning engineers, etc. to build these models that will understand our behavior and our emotions.
Right.
So it's great because then they can give us what we want when we are looking for entertainment and a break from our day. The problem is, I feel like this is creating a generation of people shooted at instant gratification and dopamine.
Oh, absolutely. We know this with heroin. If you think about Google as kind of giving people, or whoever it is giving people quick fixes, standing on the, heroin dealers standing on the street corners giving out heroin to school kids, you'd have these guys like, strung up from a lamppost. But we have the equivalent going on over the internet where all these guys are safe. And so one of the things I think is really important, and it touches on what you said there, is bringing greater consciousness to the financial decision-making process, because the subconscious processes that run it aren't very good at it. The subconscious processes that they're there to keep us alive. They're not great at long-term planning or anything that requires us to engage with our discomfort, and we have to learn this. The rational thing when I'm feeling uncomfortable is to deal with the discomfort, not to ask, why is that? As long as we're not asking, why is that, then there's some tech company with some banner ad that's ready to remove the discomfort from our lives at that moment in time.
Yes, our generation has lost the ability to withstand discomfort, because now it's so easy to have your dopamine shoot whenever something is going wrong in your life. And there is always a quick fix.
There's always a quick fix, and it's always...
whether it works or no.
Well, it's always unlikely to be the best long-term solution. So you can see it now, because essentially all this stuff that we've talked about around tech is around the attention economy and hacking our attention. So if I look at my kids and try and get them off their phones, and I don't mean this judgmentally, because they've learned that whenever there's a moment of discomfort in their lives, they pick up the phone. And something in there, whether it's an Instagram feed or whatever it is, will give them a little dopamine hit, and off they'll go. And so we get stuck to this process of not understanding discomfort, not engaging with discomfort, and not moving beyond discomfort, and just being trapped in the cycle of short-term quick fixes to discomfort. And even if dealing with it involves alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, all that sort of stuff, that's another way to deal with your discomfort.
It's so true that there is even a book about it. It's called Hooked, written by Nir Eyal. And this book is a bestseller for all the designers, entrepreneurs building tech product. What this book explains is that the foundation of any tech product is to start with a trigger. And the trigger is often an emotional trigger. For example, you feel bored at work, then you're going to check your Instagram feed because it will give you a dopamine release. Then your brain understands that the relief to boredom is to check your Instagram. And so it worked for the first time. You will repeat and you will check that again later in the day and in the evening and tomorrow morning, etc., etc. So in the long term, that's how we build a dependency to dopamine, and we lose our ability to bear with problems and conflict and frustration.
Learned helplessness is what that is. And you learn to...
How can we break this vicious circle?
Well, you start with awareness, I suppose. The challenge is that first point, which is trying to understand what the patterns in your lives are that are unfulfilling or that are essentially leading to negative consequences. Once you look at it and go, well, why is it that every time I come off Twitter, I feel worse than before? Then you can try going, well, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have so much Twitter in my life, or maybe I should change my feeds or whatever. It's really difficult to do if you've grown up with this phone being part of your life, part of your everyday life. And even when you explain that behind every single screen are 1,000, what was that film? The Social Contract? Is that the one? The Social Dilemma, with 1,000 guys trying to hook you. It meets the need, ultimately, as all advertisers will tell you. It's not about the product, it's about the need. It meets the need. So we have to understand that discomfort is normal. It's part of the human condition. And I don't want to sound like Gandhi or anything on this. It just is, because we are social hierarchical mammals. We evolved. Our brains are evolved to keep us alive, not happy. We can find happiness, we can find meaning, we can find connection, all those things we can find. But fundamentally, discomfort sits there in the background until we learn to recognize it, look at it, and find healthy ways of dealing with it. I think we used to know this. What happened was that a whole bunch of people came along and went, I can fix your discomfort. Now, prior to, let's just say, the 1950s, there weren't very many ways of getting your discomfort fixed. There was no credit, which meant that if you didn't have money, you couldn't buy the fix of the time, which was alcohol, cocaine, or whatever, right? Now, in the last 70 years, we've had the advent of the financial system that says, I can finance this for you. You can buy it now and pay when you feel like. Who's that? Whose tagline is that? That's Klarna, right? Buy now, pay when you feel like. No, I don't think that's technically correct. You pay when you have to, not when you feel like, because most people would never feel like paying. And we have a tech infrastructure and a fintech infrastructure that is telling us that we can fix your needs, we can fix your discomfort, and we can finance it for you at the click of a button. That's why it's so pervasive, and that's why it's so challenging to step back from that and question it and go, well, why am I not feeling better? Surely this is my normal, right? If I look at my 15-year-old child, that's his normal. I can lecture him about being on his phone too much, but that's his normal, right? That's his society. And that is going to be a huge challenge. If you go back to E.O. Wilson and that quote that the social contract guys always go on about, the problems of society are down to the fact we have Paleolithic brains, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. They're all out of abundance. And the godlike technology is accelerating, and it's creating greater and greater distance between us and what's called the environment of evolutionary adaptation. We used to live in the environment of evolutionary adaptation 20,000 years ago. We were hunter-gatherers, we were foragers, we were, wandering around in groups of 50 to 150 people. And I'm not trying to make it sound romantic, because it wasn't. But that was the environment that our brains were adapted to keep us alive in, not the environment that we live in now. So we can stay alive because we're incredible creatures as human beings, but that isn't going to make us happy.
You said it so well, Denis. Our brain is designed to avoid discomfort because we used to live in a very tough and hostile environment. So we needed that to survive, and we have survived as a species until today. Now, ironically, the need to avoid discomfort is working against us. And because technology and social media make it so easy to avoid any little discomfort, we become dependent on instant gratification.
Sure.
In other words, technology is making us weak.
That's right.
And by making us weak, we refuse to bear with discomfort, and we become so dependent on instant gratification. And that's why in the end, it's so hard to manage money, because weak people don't have the strength to think long-term, to do what's right today, and to have delayed gratification.
We're wired for instant gratification, and that is what has kept the human species alive for hundreds of thousands of years. That's why when you see a cookie or a cake or anything that will give you a dopamine hit or even energy or fat, you eat it and we store it. The reason we, as human beings, we store fat is that our brains use 20% of energy, of the whole energy budget. This little 3-pound nugget up here weighs 2% of the body, and it uses 20% of its energy. That's a huge investment of the metabolic budget. And to run that and to make sure that it's always got energy available, we keep fat on us. That's why we have fat. Fat is a store of energy that allows us to keep operating and keep running our brains. And the way we get fat is by converting sugar or fat that we find around us instantly. Now, in an environment where you had to kill everything before you could eat it, or you could eat plants, that made a lot of sense, right? If I saw some honey or a source of energy, I would eat all of it, right? Our ancestors didn't leave food lying around, didn't do that. So if you just take that small dietary perspective and go, well, we did not evolve to manage our cravings for sugar, because our cravings for sugar kept us alive 20,000 years ago. Now our cravings for sugar kill us with type 2 diabetes. There's this switch between a reduction in mortality and an increase in morbidity. So the natural world doesn't kill us anymore. Our behaviors kill us instead. We've got a bit away from money. we got off the subject of money.
Not at all. I think it's very relevant, because money and spending is all about resource management. And today our problem is that we have an overabundance of things to buy and to eat. And our problem is to limit ourselves and control ourselves because, as you said, our brain was designed to survive in a world of scarcity.
That's right. And so we think that that's okay. And we have brains that are interested in short-term gratification. So we look at things and go, right, I need to eat that donut. I need to drink that glass of wine. I need to buy that t-shirt, that car, whatever, because that's what I need right now. And that's what their brain is telling them. And I think the whole debate around rational versus irrational behavior misses the point. Your body, your brain is telling you that the rational thing to do, well, it's not even rational. The thing to do right now is to meet that need, to meet that discomfort. If you were a forager 20,000 years ago and you were hungry, you think, I'll eat later. No, if I need to eat now and I need to find something and I need to eat it now. There's no later, right? There's no fridges. There's no Domino's. There's no Uber Eats. It's about getting energy, putting it into the system so that I can stay alive. That is our wiring, right? It's not taught. I'm not that it's a secret or anything, but that's not how we're taught to think about ourselves. We're taught to think about ourselves as people that make rational decisions because we can, provided we're in a rational decision-making state. But that is not how we do this. That is not how 95% of our behavior, 95% of our decision-making process is done. Understanding that is tremendously freeing because you can go, oh, you know what? That's what I'm supposed to do. Now I can make more conscious choices around it. It's okay to feel cravings. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay to do that. If you think about it, all organisms from bacteria to whales passed their days mostly getting energy from food and then spending that energy to grow, survive, and reproduce. That is a core evolutionary strategy. That is what we are as mammals, hardwired, hard-coded to do. And that's why meeting needs when we have them is so important. Where we trip up over this is like, you know, if you hurt your leg or you break your leg or you hurt yourself, that is a feedback mechanism for something you need to draw attention to. And you go, right, I need to deal with that. That pain is my body's way of telling me something needs dealing with. Internal pain, we look at that and go, how do I make that go away? How do I make that bad feeling go away? How do I make that discomfort go away? As opposed to looking at it and going, well, what's that trying to tell me? How do I get curious around that?
The way that we are addressing our daily problems has also changed through the years. I remember back in the days when I had a problem, I would just talk to my parents, my friends, and I'd try to have a discussion. Now, as you said, your kids have a problem. Their habit is to just check their phone and try to find the relief there.
We would listen to music. That was one for me, certainly. And so what you're talking about there possibly is a concept of self-regulation. I understand my discomfort. I self-regulate around it. I'm not looking necessarily for external sources to do that. If we are looking at a broader level and going, well, I don't feel great, what can I buy to make myself feel better, as opposed to looking at what that discomfort is telling you about who you are or what you are in that moment. And again, I don't mean it judgmentally. Then you'll never fix that discomfort because an external stimulus can't do it. We know this in relationships because we know that someone else can't fill the hole that you have in yourself. We think that might work, but in the end it doesn't.
I think this is where having somebody else can be very helpful because when we are alone facing our problems, it's very hard to self-reflect and pause and I'm wondering, why do I feel that way?
Sure. That's right.
Dennis, what's your advice to solve directly the root problem, the hard stuff, instead of trying to find a quick fix? Because we know that the quick fix might very well end up on Amazon.
Well, we start with self-compassion. We've kind of got off the subject of money. There's lots of interesting things we can talk about money. I think the way I'm going to answer this question is that from studies around happiness, what keeps people happy, what the most important things around being happy in the long term are having relationships with people that love you and that you can love back. This is one of the most fundamental constituents of happiness, the broadest happiness sense of the word. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about what you just said around, I'm not feeling great, what would I do with that? I would go to a safe space. Someone would create a safe space for me, and I would talk to them about it. And I would go, I'm not feeling great. I don't know what's the matter. Do you feel the same way? And maybe that person does, in which case, okay, that's great. It's not just me. Or maybe that person will go, well, what is it? Is it the girlfriend? Is it the school? Is it, what is it in your life right now that's challenging you? And they would listen to you. One of the most powerful things you can do for anybody is just to listen to them. And they can go, and you would go, Sam, that sounds really hard. Don't listen to fix. I don't want to fix it. I just want to listen to learn. I want you to feel heard. Now, as a society, we've lost that because now we go, I don't feel great, I'm going to pick up my phone. So what I'm kind of getting at in a long-term answer is there's a reason why humans evolved to live in groups of 25 to 50 or 150, whatever it is because that group would provide validation for the individual and that individual could work through their issues and feel supported and judgment-free in that environment. And somehow we've lost that, partly because of the way we live and partly because we don't communicate that way and partly because we've got these external influences that say, drive this, you'll be happy, wear this, all that thing. And to recognize that that is not the answer to what your challenges are, not necessarily. It's kind of, does that make any sense, or is that just kind of really sort of wishy-washy philosophical kind of answer to that?
It totally makes sense. You're saying that if you have your friends, your family, your partner to talk about your emotional problems, then you won't be alone and you won't be trying to solve that problem by buying random stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
Which is why we always say that having money and buying stuff won't make you happy. Your relationships will make you happy.
Yeah. We evolved as a species to be social hierarchical mammals, to live in groups, to be supported within that group. And the way we've lived our lives, the way that things have changed massively since the Industrial Revolution at an accelerating pace has made it far, far more difficult for us to live in harmony with our core evolutionary programming. And I'm not anti-technology. I'm not, I'm not like driving a buggy with the Amish. I'm just saying that you have to recognize that the further away you get from this environment of evolutionary adaptation, the greater the stresses that we put on ourselves as a society and as individuals. So part of the way forward, or the way up, the answer is, or I think what helps people is to feel heard, not judged, to be in situations where they feel safe and to be able to express what's really scary for them and have somebody or a group that says, Sam, that's really scary. Tell us about it.
I totally agree. And I even believe that the best saving hook is to fix your life. When you don't like who you are and where your life is going, the easy solution is always to try to fill that with some instant gratification. Doing drugs and consuming money are a very effective way to escape reality. Unfortunately, it will never fix the problem.
That's right. That's that financial solution to an emotional problem thing again. At a fundamental level, what your brain is asking itself is, am I safe? Do I feel safe? Do I feel safe in this job? Do I feel safe in this relationship? Does this person make me feel safe? And if the answer is no, or at least the brain thinks the answer is no, it's going to manifest as discomfort. So when you try and mask that discomfort, there's a guy called Gabor Mate, who, if you haven't come across him, he's absolutely amazing, Hungarian neuroscientist, works with people in Vancouver who with addiction issues. And he makes a really, really simple point. Don't ask why the addiction, ask what is the pain. If you ask what is the pain, then the addiction makes sense, because the addiction is simply a way to mask the pain. The behavior is simply a way to manage the discomfort, the dis-ease, to use a Peter Crone term, that person finds in themselves or finds themselves in. And yeah, you can go and shop till you drop and you can do all of that stuff. It's not going to fix your discomfort because it can't. At the neurological level, at the biological level, the release of dopamine is not a strategy for managing discomfort. It's a reward neurotransmitter that...
Like morphine.
Yeah.
You feel bad, you take morphine.
And if you've got a broken leg, neither will meditating. It's recognizing what that discomfort's telling you and not being afraid to look at it. And I'm saying that with full compassion because looking at your discomfort is a scary thing. We're not taught to do this. We're not supported in it. And so we go back to what is my evolutionary programming, and the brain says, keep me safe. This is uncomfortable. I need to get safe. Now, if you were like wandering down a dark alley and you felt uncomfortable and your brain went, get out of here, right? That is a core survival mechanism that works whether you're on the savannah or whether you're in a dark alley or just in a physically dangerous place. That is not a great mechanism for dealing with discomfort in the emotional space.
As a final takeaway, what's your advice for those who want to build mental strength and resilience?
Start with self-compassion. You didn't make most of the choices that got you to where you are today, and that's all right. Understand your physiology, understand what it's trying to do to you, and understand how you can work with it, and understand that it will take a bit of time. But you are enough. We're all enough, even though the messages that we get in childhood and all the way from childhood are we are not enough. No, you are enough. And then I think you need to start on a process of education, maybe financial literacy education, or just working with people that can explain how things work in a way that you don't feel threatened by. So you kind of asked me about books. And yeah, if you are interested, then there's a whole bunch of stuff on my website, but
do you have one book to recommend about self-compassion?
I'm gonna go for The Power of Talking About Money by Alex Holder. And it's not psychological it's not neuroscience or anything. It's about someone who in their middle of life went, why do I do this? How do I change my life? How do I have more self-worth? And how do I stop these unhealthy patterns around money? So, yeah, I think it's a really, really good place to start. The Power of Talking About Money, Alex Holder, Open Up. Alex is a woman, which means that she's a lot more in tune with things than men. Men try and fix things, and when they can't fix things, they ignore them. Women have the capacity, a much greater capacity for self-reflection. They're not so scared of themselves.
Yes, women are better at understanding and dealing with their emotions because we as men, we like to run away from our negative emotions.
You know why that is? I was thinking about that recently. I mean, it's that I believe that the messaging that we get from society, certainly as men, is that being emotional is unsafe for us. And that's really bad, because what that means is you tend to ignore emotions when in fact emotions are a very, very important signal about life. But we're taught that showing emotion is bad. We're teased if we cry. We're told to man up. We're told that stiff upper lip, big boys don't cry. We're told all of those things. Now, if you had a broken leg and someone said, oh, don't worry about it, just keep walking, everyone will look pretty stupid, right? But emotions are internal messages. And we're told to ignore those. We're told that it's not safe to express emotion. And then, you get laughed at for crying, you get laughed at for expressing emotion, and that message gets reinforced through school and the rest of society. And it's really damaging. Emotions are really important. We started with the concept that you can't make good decisions without emotions. So, what are we doing with our emotions by pretending they don't exist? Or trying to anesthetize them with drugs, with spending, with dopamine, with risky activity and risky behavior.
We don't often say it, but spending money can become an addiction.
Massively,
and if
course.
you ever feel like this is happening to you, then start with self-compassion. I learned a lot today, and I want to give you a huge thanks, Dennis. Thank you for being our first guest in our podcast series. I hope we will see you again. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this episode enjoyable, inspiring, and educational. in this era of instant gratification, it is more important than ever to train our delayed gratification muscle. So keep learning, keep improving by 1% every day. You may not see the result right now, but this is a secret of all the successful people I've met. Please help me spread financial education by sharing this podcast with your friends and community. I would love it if you could also leave us a review. It really helps the show. Now, I would like you to forget about all the advertising that is being pushed to us on a daily basis and think about your personal financial goals. What do you really want to achieve with your money? If you have financial objectives, then check out the Nova Money app. Nova is an AI that will show you how to set financial goals and how to achieve them. A plan is only useful if you can follow it. That's why Nova will send you daily motivational messages to give you the strength to ignore the daily temptations of spending money and stay focused on your goals. Like other budgeting apps, Nova connects all your bank accounts in one place to give you the full picture. The difference is that the Nova AI will do all the budgeting and tracking for you. The second difference is that unlike many free personal finance apps, we don't sell users' data. All your data is encrypted and will remain completely private. Make sure that you're investing in your financial education. Make sure that you're building your financial freedom. And I'll speak to you in the next episode.